One of the great secrets of the church is how many of us don't believe all the things we think we're supposed to. It's sometimes shocking to those on the outside of the church to discover that. And it's sometimes shocking to those of us on the inside to discover that that kind of diversity and unorthodoxy has always existed. The winners write history, but there were faithful people in every age whose ideas did not win, and so ended up in the dustbin of religious history. I have sometimes said that what makes the United Church of Christ unique in the American religious landscape is that we simply name and claim that diversity and doubt and disagreement. We call it our own, we love it, we polish it, we present it to the world. But it exists in every congregation, not just progressive churches, conservative ones as well, and everything in between. One tenet of the faith about which there is a multiplicity of opinion and a great deal of doubt is the resurrection. Some accept the claim that Jesus was raised from the dead at face value. For these folks, it presents no real problem. Others struggle to find a way to make it fit in our postmodern world. Others come to a sort of uneasy middle ground, asserting some sort of amorphous, mushy, undefined belief that somehow life continues after death. In my Easter sermon a few weeks ago, hedging my bets and trying to make the resurrection as user-friendly as possible, I simply referred to it as an abundance, beyond what we can see and touch and taste, an abundance. But here's the thing. The Gospel of Luke makes a very specific claim about what the resurrection looked like. Luke preaches the now out-of-fashion doctrine of the resurrection of the body. He says that the risen Christ had recognizable flesh and bone. And whether you believe that or not, what Luke is doing, among other things, is making a very powerful statement about the sacredness and the worth of our bodies. They are holy and good enough in God's mind to reveal the resurrection. The disciples were gathered in a room in Jerusalem talking about all these crazy, wild stories about a risen Jesus. All those who hadn't experienced it thought it was poppycock. All of them. In fact, the disciples had accused the women who had seen the empty tomb of spreading idle tales. The Greek word that Luke employs there is laros, the root of which is in our word delirious. In other words, those women, those crazy women, are out of their minds. Isn't it interesting to note that with the exception of these women, even those closest to Jesus did not believe that he had been raised from the dead. No one believed it. Not one person in the Bible believed it. The resurrection was as crazy and as incredulous to people 2,000 years ago as it is to some of us today. Suddenly, Jesus stood among them. just about scared them to death. Seeing their reaction, I imagine that he lifted his hands like this to show them that he was harmless and said, "Peace be with you." But that peace was easier said and heard than experienced. They thought they were seeing a ghost because they believed in such things. And because they believed in such things, they were terrified. Since Jesus' words of peace were not enough to stave their terror, he invited them to touch his flesh and bones, hoping to calm their minds. And he teased them a little bit. When you read this carefully, he teases them and says, "A ghost does not have flesh and bones like me." It was commonly thought at that time, because they believed in ghosts, that ghosts also never ate. A ghost doesn't need to eat, right? But this reason Jesus asked them for something to eat. And Luke says that they gave him a piece of broiled fish. I like that detail. A piece of broiled fish. And so they watched this ghost eat. And maybe some of them reached out to touch the flesh and bones. But whatever they did, whatever they saw, it was enough to calm them down so they could hear what he had to say, which is always the point of miracles in the New Testament. It's to get people's attention so they listen to what Jesus had to say. And Jesus opened the scriptures to them to help them make sense of those last chaotic days. He helped to frame that dreadful experience in the light of God's eternity. And they began to understand that day that his death was not the end of his mission, and that God can use any kind of evil for good. Now, it's tempting to give this text a simplistic and triumphalistic interpretation. It's tempting to stop right there. One could say that this is simply a story about people who didn't believe in the resurrection, but then, by golly, they met the risen Jesus, and all their doubts were washed away. But that is not what happened. Hidden in the midst of the details of this story is a powerful phrase that speaks volumes to any of you, or me, or anyone else who has ever entertained serious doubts about the resurrection or anything else about God. After Jesus had shown them his hands and feet and invited them to touch him, Luke writes, "While in their joy, they were disbelieving." While in their joy, they were disbelieving. And when I read that phrase earlier this week, it literally leapt off the page at me. There it was, right in the Bible. A clear statement of what I so often experience: joy and doubt happening at the very same time. I like that phrase so much because sometimes, truth be told, I am not sure that any of this is true. I read the writings of atheists. I stay up to date on the latest scientific discoveries. I read about and see the great and onerous damage that religion does every day in this world. And I have doubts. deep and dark. But I also have moments of incredible joy. I have had experiences of transcendence. I have had moments when I was sure I had been in the very presence of God. Once, and I have never told anyone this, but once I have come to believe I even had an experience of the risen Jesus. But despite that, my doubts remain. And so my experience is like that of those disciples. My doubt and my joy, my faith and my fear, they all live together in community. Many people were surprised to learn of the serious and decades-long doubts of Mother Teresa. The posthumously published book, Mother Teresa, Come Be My Light, is made up of private letters she wrote to her spiritual advisors that she never wanted anybody else to read. And in these letters, she speaks plainly and painfully about her doubt. In one correspondence to the Reverend Michael Vanderpeet, she wrote, Father, Jesus has a very special love for you. As for me, the silence and the emptiness are so great that I look and do not see. I listen, but I do not hear. Mother Teresa never wanted that letter quoted in a sermon. Perhaps she thought that her words would harm folks like us, but they actually help me. They remind me that doubt is as organic to the Christian experience as faith or hope or joy. The great author and Christian mystic Madeleine L'Engle once was asked, do you believe in God without any doubts? And she famously replied, I believe in God with all my doubts. And that is the witness of the Christian people from the very beginning of our movement. If you struggle to believe, that experience is not strange or solitary. Doubt and joy, faith and fear all dance together in this life. And they are all held in the hands of the one who died and is alive forevermore.